It's a Saturday evening, a mutual friend's dinner party. 8 people around a table that's slightly too small, which means everyone is closer than they'd normally choose to be. The wine is good. The conversation has that comfortable rhythm of people who mostly know each other. She's sitting diagonally across from you, late 50s, maybe 60, composed, the kind of woman who listens more than she talks and notices more than she lets on. You were introduced briefly near the door. A name, a handshake, a moment of eye contact that lasted just a beat longer than necessary. Now, 40 minutes into dinner, the man to her left is leaning in, explaining something about his investment portfolio with the enthusiasm of someone who needs the table to understand that he has done well. His hand moves in small circles as he talks. She's nodding, but her eyes have gone slightly distant. Polite, present enough, not quite there. You haven't said much. You asked the host a question about where they sourced the fish. You made one observation about something someone else said. Quiet, dry, accurate, and let it land without following it up. She glanced at you when you said it, not a long glance, a fraction of a second, but her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, just a degree in your direction. You didn't press it. You picked up your glass. You let the conversation move. Later, near the end of the evening, she ends up beside you in the narrow hallway near the coats. She speaks first, not about anything significant, something about the dessert, the neighborhood. But she's turned toward you fully now, and there's a quality of attention in it that wasn't present with the man who spent 40 minutes explaining himself. Most men would look at that moment and try to identify what they said that worked. They'd be looking in entirely the wrong place. Women, particularly women in their 50s and 60s, women who have lived through marriages and losses and the long education of experience, are not evaluating you the way you might assume. They're not running a checklist. They're not tallying accomplishments or assessing your conversational performance in any conscious, systematic way. What they're doing is something more instinctive and in some ways more sophisticated. They're reading your relationship with yourself. This is the layer most men never think to address. A man in his 60s who is still performing, still managing his image, still subtly angling for approval, still filling silence because silence feels like losing ground, broadcasts something specific, not incompetence, not lack of status, something more precise, unresolved need. The sense that he has not yet made peace with who he is, that he requires external confirmation to feel stable, that the conversation is partly about him convincing her of something. Women in this age range have spent decades around that energy. In many cases, they spend years married to it. They recognize it within minutes, sometimes within seconds, not because they're critical, but because they're attuned. And once they recognize it, a certain door quietly closes. What opens a different door is harder to perform and easier to misunderstand. It's not confidence in the motivational poster sense. It's not the studied casualness of a man who's read too many articles about body language. It's something internal that produces external stillness, the genuine absence of the need to manage the impression you're making. That absence, that settled quality, is what she registered when you made the quiet observation and didn't follow it up. You said something worth saying and then returned to yourself. You weren't waiting for her reaction. You weren't watching the table to see who laughed. You were simply present and then you moved on. That's the habit, not a technique, a state of being that develops when a man has done enough internal work to stop outsourcing his self-assessment to the people around him. The question is how a man actually gets there and what stands in the way. Here's where this needs to be said plainly, because glossing over it produces a script about behavior rather than truth. Many men in their 60s are carrying something they haven't fully processed. A marriage that ended, either in divorce or in loss, leaves a specific kind of residue. Not just grief, though grief is part of it. Something more structural, a reorganization of identity that most men were never given tools to complete. For a long stretch of life, who you were was partly defined by your role in a partnership. Husband, provider, the person she relied on, or tried to rely on, or failed to rely on in ways that still surface at odd moments. When that role ends, for any reason, the identity scaffolding that was built around it doesn't automatically come down clean. Men often find themselves years later still orienting toward a relational role that no longer exists. This shows up in dating in very specific ways. The over-explanation, the resume quality that creeps into early conversations, the need to establish fairly quickly that you have built something, that you are someone, that whatever happened before does not define the current version of you. It's understandable. It's also visible. And what it signals to an observant woman is not security. It's the outline of a wound. This is where the nuance matters, because the solution is not suppression. A man who has learned to mask his unresolved need is not the same as a man who has resolved it. The mask produces a different kind of signal, a flatness, a too careful composure that reads as its own form of unavailability. Women who've been through enough can feel the difference between a man who's genuinely at ease and a man who's managing himself in real time. The path is neither performance nor concealment. It's the slower, less comfortable work of actually settling accounts with your own history, the marriage, the loss, the version of yourself you thought you'd be by now. Not in a therapeutic sense necessarily, though that has its place. In the sense of arriving at a genuine, non-defensive relationship with your own story. When that work is done, even partially, the quality of your presence changes, not because you've learned anything about how to act around women, because you've stopped needing the interaction to resolve something for you. Let's make this concrete, because abstract insight without application is just mood. The habit at the center of this is what might be called interested detachment. It sounds like a contradiction. It isn't. Interested, you are genuinely curious about the person in front of you, not performing curiosity, actually experiencing it. You ask questions that aren't interview questions. You follow what she says into its actual meaning rather than waiting for your turn. You notice specific things, a word she chose, a hesitation, a change in tone, and you're present enough to respond to what's actually happening rather than what you expected to happen. Detached. You have no stake in where this goes. Not because you don't care, you might care quite a lot, but because you've separated your sense of self from the outcome. She can be charmed or unmoved, interested or indifferent, and you remain the same person either way. That stability is not coldness. It's the opposite of anxiety. And it is, for women who've spent time around anxious men, profoundly attractive. In practice, this means tolerating pauses, letting a moment of silence sit without filling it. It means making a single observation and then waiting, not waiting for approval, just waiting, which is a different posture entirely. It means asking one question and listening to the full answer instead of constructing your next statement while she's still speaking. It also means being willing to let an interaction not go anywhere without treating it as a verdict. Not every conversation becomes something. Most don't. Men who've detached their self-assessment from outcomes move through that reality differently than men who are still keeping score. There's a related discipline worth naming: the management of your own history in early conversation. Not hiding it, that produces a different problem, but not leading with it either. Your divorce, your loss, your years of experience, the life you've built, these can be present in the room without becoming the subject of the room. They're context, not content. The man who knows the difference carries himself accordingly. One more calibration. This habit works because it's real. The moment it becomes a strategy, the moment you're deploying interested detachment as a technique to produce a particular response, it stops working. Women read inauthenticity at close range with considerable accuracy. The goal is not to appear unattached to outcomes. The goal is to actually become someone who has done the work to get there. That distinction is the whole thing. Go back to that hallway near the coats. She turned toward you. She spoke first. And what she was responding to, underneath the dessert and the neighborhood and the small talk, was the specific feeling of being near a man who wasn't asking anything of her. Not for validation, not for interest, not for the quiet reassurance that he still has it, that the years haven't cost him more than he could afford. He was simply there, complete, not finished. Completed men are a myth, but not fractured in ways that required her management. This is what status with women at this stage of life actually means. It has almost nothing to do with wealth or appearance or the conventional signals that matter more when everyone is younger and the metrics are simpler. It has everything to do with a quality of presence that only develops after a man has lived enough to stop fighting his own story. The men who carry that quality didn't acquire it by learning tactics. They acquired it, if they acquired it, by going through the losses without going bitter, by letting the roles they used to play dissolve without panicking, by eventually arriving at a self that doesn't require the world to confirm it each morning. That's not a small thing. For many men, it's the work of years. Some never get there, not because they lack the capacity, but because they never identified it as the work. Here's the question worth sitting with, not how do I present myself better, but am I actually at peace with the life I've lived, including the parts that didn't go the way I planned? Because whatever your honest answer is, that answer is what she's reading when she looks at you across a dinner table. The man who can say yes, quietly and without theater, doesn't need to explain himself. He doesn't need to perform. He walks into a room, he pays attention, he says what's worth saying, and he lets the rest go. That's the habit. And at 60, it's the most powerful thing you own.